Greetings to the viewers of the Dr. Obatishaka Show. How's everybody doing? I see some of our early check-ins here. Loud to Zoo, the first one. Sister Robin, Wolf Manlu, M. Jewel. Greetings to you all and others. Ed Donaldson and others as you join Brother Ugawa. As usual, I want to encourage people to hit the like button, and for new people to the show to hit the subscribers button. Do that so we can boost our subscriber and viewership on this show. As I pointed out in most shows, the central purpose of these shows is to aid people in their quest and their own purpose in life, to pursue your own goals, to pursue your own objectives, and hopefully to add to your own personal empowerment as well as to the empowerment of our people as well. So that's the purpose of these shows. Carolina Huffy, Hotep to you, and Gloria Briscoe. Greetings to you. So that's the central purpose of this, is to empower you. So you can use it both on a personal and a collective level to improve your lives and to promote justice in the society and in the world. By the way, yesterday was my solar return, August the 4th, my 84th birthday. So, and all of you that have had birthdays, happy birthday to you. 84. My strategy is to live past 100, and so far it's working. No real illnesses per se that could disrupt that plan. So with God's will, hopefully that happens. You know what I mean? Yeah, 84 and on deck. You got that right. The longer it gets, the better it gets, provided that you're pursuing your path. But this is a rough course, you know, life on Mother Earth. It ain't all easy. To Yvette Anderson, Hotep to you. This show is going to be, again, another special one. But before getting into this show, I would be remiss in ignoring a very historical happening. The indictment of Trump, Donald Trump, former president of the United States. There's already been two, but this one is particularly important because it's an indictment that, while it doesn't indict him directly for leading the insurrection, probably because it's a difficult charge to prove legally, though it shouldn't be. I mean, it's clear this guy called for the January 6th uprising and then encouraged people to go and carry out their attack on the Congress, and even set up the stage for, had they got their hands on the vice president and a few other people, they actually had a lynching post up for him. And this is following the Turner Diaries. So the reason I want to focus on this is that it's a demonstration of Black power and people power, because basically it was the movement, the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, anti-police violence movement, the frustration that people had over COVID, And the majority of people in this country over Trump's handling of it that led to 40% of the deaths due to COVID in the world. And blacks assumed 40% of those deaths. In the state of Louisiana, even more than that. So the movement that emerged in the midst of the campaign for Trump trying to get reelected, along with other factors, put Trump in a position of being knocked out of the White House and prepared for the jailhouse. It's taken the Justice Department over 2 years to even appoint a counsel, over 2 years, to address this. And this could lead to the biggest problem of all, that if Trump got reelected, he'd be in a position of exempting himself through presidential pardon. Now, the thing is, he would not be able to do that for state offenses. And we have a sister prosecutor in Georgia lining him up on that. But still, it leaves it open that he could slip through, at least on the federal charges. However, what's significant about the indictment of Trump on 4 charges announced by the person, the attorney, Mr. Smith, who has been appointed to investigate these matters, the way in which these have been framed, it is very likely that he'll be put on trial before the election is completed. And there should be an outcome, therefore. It's also interesting that these charges are being brought in Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, where a majority, even though that majority is declining, of its inhabitants are Black. It's also interesting that the judge that will preside over this is a sister, and she has hit the so-called insurrectionists with the heaviest of penalties. Because, Black folks, we're serious about the truth, and I want to take my hat off to sisters. And I should note that while the Black Lives Matter movement sealed its fate, and I did a show on that, it was the second or third show, you should go watch it, that compared the 2 post-Reconstruction periods, 1876, and then the period that started in 1968, and predicted what happened. But it was the movement of Black Lives Matter, and not just Black Lives Matter, but groups affiliated with that kind of protest that brought it about. But it was Georgia that sealed his fate. As one of our great singers, Ray Charles, said, "Georgia on my mind." He didn't have the state of Georgia on his mind. No Black person in their right mind would have sung a song on the state of Georgia, as vicious as it has been and continues to be. No, Georgia was a Georgia peach, a sister. But the fact is that the election outcome in Georgia really sealed his fate. And then in the Senate as well, gave you 2 senators. They gave a 1-vote majority in the Senate for the Democrats that have been spoiled by moderate Democrats who upset some of the main agenda items that could have been passed, but still enabled one of the strongest bills on infrastructure to be passed, and a few others. While the Democrats have not done what they could do to even push for overturning the movement in state legislatures to restrict and to repeal the Black vote by putting up all kinds of false barriers aimed at Blacks, brown, and young people who are going to vote Democratic. But I just wanted to note the basic charges that are being brought against Trump and why it's likely to lead to a trial well before this election. Michelle Dawson talks about many shifts happening in Africa right now as well. Niger is one of them, where a so-called duly elected president was overthrown by a military coup, and most of the military in Niger in recent years has been trained by the United States. So let's just look at the charges, and I wanted to note these and at least the likely prospect that they're going to get them on something. Of course, it's got to be a unanimous verdict, assuming that this will be a trial by jury. And I think that's reasonable to assume. So, charge number one is conspiracy to defraud the United States. And it comes under a special section of the U.S. Code 371. And basically, this charge is punishable by 5 years in prison. And the possibility of using this charge against Mr. Trump and his associates in connection with their effort to overturn the election results has long been part of the public discussion or investigation. In March 2022, a federal judge ruled that emails to and from John Eastman, a lawyer who advised Trump in the effort, probably involved that crime, the conspiracy to defraud the United States. And that would, of course, be by overturning an illegal legal election. And then the House committee that investigated this reached similar conclusions. And so this is charge number one, conspiracy to defraud the United States. Charge number two, the conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Now this is real funny. You can see whose side I'm on this one. A conviction for this charge will lead to 20 years in prison, or at least up to that. That's the maximum. And it's closely related to the first charge. Essentially, it is the charge that Trump and others agreed to commit the underlying crime of trying to disrupt the session of Congress that certified Mr. Biden's electoral college victory. And so this is really an attempt by Trump to overturn the election. And I'll go into just a little bit of the nuance of that in a minute. Count three, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. Now this is really slick because this one sounds a lot like the first one, but there's a distinct law on that. They got a law for everything. Unfortunately, the guilty don't often get prosecuted, particularly if they got power. And that may help explain the delay in, even appointing a special counsel on this. But so this is a closely related charge to the one before, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. This one is an obstruction or attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. So basically, it's saying that in the storming of the Capitol, that there was a move being made to obstruct a decision of Congress and to therefore prevent or, obstruct the certifying of the election of Biden to the presidency, something that is required by law. So this just piles on another charge. And then the final one, which is quite interesting and accurate, count 4, a conspiracy against rights. This is the conspiracy against voter rights. And this particular charge and this particular statute was enacted after the Civil War. And it was aimed at the Ku Klux Klan, which we're seeing revived in many different forms, including the direct form of Donald Trump, who has said there were good people out there, demonstrating, who were, right wingers and so forth. So this one is directed at Ku Klux Klan terrorism aimed at stripping blacks of the vote. Now, it's generally not recognized that that charge is a charge, while attributed to post-Reconstruction and the rise of the Klan, actually is a charge directed against Klan and other right-wing activities occurring immediately after the Civil War. I pointed this out on previous shows. There was very little federal presence in the way of federal troops to protect blacks and their exercise of the vote during Reconstruction, let alone when those few troops were removed in the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. So this is essentially a statute that is based on that. So this includes new measures that have been enacted since then in the 20th century against ballot stuffing and other illegal vote rigging methods that have been used. Now, a key part of the Trump charge around stealing the election, when in fact that charge, which was false, there's been no basis for saying that the election outcome in this last presidential election was stolen. In fact, it was the largest turnout in 100 years for presidential election, and it led to an overwhelming Biden victory, though Trump had really turned his base out, including 7 million more people than he had in the first election. And you're seeing now he poses a credible challenge, even with 3 indictments and a 4th one coming down and probably others, So this is not something to be taken as, oh, this guarantees that Trump's not going to be reelected, and if reelected, not being able to stay in office. But what's brilliant about these charges, even though they don't include the main charge, which is insurrection, is that they are framed solely against Donald Trump. There are no other defendants being charged. Why is that important? It means that Trump's lawyers are going to have less grounds for stalling based on discovery motions and based on various challenges. If there were a number of other people being charged at the same time, then this would pile up, the way in which the charges would be applied, and therefore give each defendant a chance to raise questions that could prolong the time before a trial. So this is smart. The other smart thing is that the special prosecutor only has to make the same case to prove all 4 charges. This is real smart, So, I mean, if you look at this guy, you should look at his eyes. He looks like he's one of these true believers. Trump has tried to fake being a gangster. Of course, he is in the sense that he's stealing stuff like people's rights and stuff, but he ain't got what it takes to be a real gangster. But this guy here, you know, he's a true blue, red, white, and blue. You know what I mean? And he's been doing this a good part of his life. So this is smart, and it's going to give Trump less wiggle room. The judge for this trial which will have its next hearing the end of August this month, is going to set a date for trial. Now, probably, it'll give him a couple of months. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But this is a no-nonsense judge. This is a judge appointed by Obama. Now, Obama tended to appoint people middle of the road. He tended not to do like the Republicans and go after the hardliners, which is now, been able to end the right to abortion and further strip blacks of various powers, and be others coming up, including the benefits of affirmative action. As limited as they may have been, they were important. While whites get to affirmatively practice theirs of genocide, slavery, stealing half of Mexico, and then talk about this is a meritocracy of bloodshed, of genocide, of slavery, and it still goes on. So this is appropriate also for the topic for today, because it's an example of your power. But most of you don't even give yourself credit for it. There should have been celebrations all over the country that blacks had. Everybody should have been jumping from the rooftops, not so much because Trump was just put out. Your power put him out. That was a coalition. And blacks voted overwhelmingly against Trump. 86% of brothers, 92% of sisters against him. Latinos over 70%, Asians over 50%. And then a third of whites voted against him. That's what we often don't get, is whites don't go all one way. They split. It's a combination of all those things, but essentially the movements that young black people have been organizing, that was key to this thing. Your power took them out, but a lot of you act like you don't have any. I led the only successful Black Power, Black Freedom movement in the North. King led the movement in the South, though it was a broad-based movement. It was his organization that came up with the strategic power that gave you the end of legal apartheid, which a lot of us tend to put down because white supremacy is still there. Who in the hell thinks that still the militarily most powerful country in the world, economically in decline, but still has great power, who thinks in one blow you're going to knock them out? So some of us misread what power is. Some of us don't know what it looks like when it's being exercised by black people, because we've been so busy celebrating white power. White supremacy, a term I don't use anymore. It's outdated. Whites are in decline. China's displacing America, and Africa's on the rise, even though it's got a lot of mess Africa's got to clean up, part of which I'll be addressing in this show today. So is your power based on your strategic power that enabled this to happen? And an awakened sector of young blacks. By the way, next week, I'll have Davey D on from Hard Knock Radio. Interviewed him this Tuesday. It was an excellent discussion on hip hop. The topic of that interview will be the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And we have some discussion in that of the power that our people have exercised in the hip hop generation in particular, because Black Lives Matter represented the political maturity of this generation. When I say Black Lives Matter, I'm just not talking about the group. I'm talking about all the networks that feed into the group. So every generation has to decide its destiny. And while hip hop did a beautiful thing in terms of taking the burning that was occurring in the Bronx and flipping it into something beautiful for the most part, and a new angle on the African American art form, I call hip hop urban blues. Chuck D, a Public Enemy, does also. I didn't get mine from him, and he didn't get his from me. Because if you know the culture, you'll know that's what it is. But still, the question was, when is this generation going to take a stand? And they did in Ferguson. They took a stand. And that term, Black Lives Matter, that was a brilliant term. If you're not a strategist, you might not get it. But it put anybody in the box who tried to say all lives matter. Well, white lives are not at stake in this country. So who has to say white lives matter? That's obvious. You understand? So it was a brilliant statement, and it came from the heart. Sisters who were expressing their love for Black folks who are being murdered at the hands of the police, mostly Black males. You understand? So it's a brilliant, not only formulation of a movement, but put them in a position of carrying out some successful strategies. So I think there's a lot more that they're going to have to do. Robin just finished The Art of Leadership, Volume 1. Yeah, thank you. And a number of leaders in Black Lives Matter say they cut their teeth on organizing through that book. Melina Abdullah, who's their best organizer, who I interacted with, I didn't know her personally, but she was a student at Berkeley High in the 80s under Mr. Richard Davies, who was her major influence. And then she said The Art of Leadership was a major influence on her. And then others in the new Black Panther Party, they sent me some stuff showing that that's been very important for them as well. So that's important. The other thing I want to announce before I get into today's show is on August the 19th, Saturday, from 10 to 6 at Lowell Park, there'll be a commemoration for Marcus Garvey. That's in Oakland, California, and I've been designated as a keynote speaker. And that same Saturday, this show will be dealing with Marcus Garvey. And so those of you who live in the Bay Area, come to Lowell Park between 10 and 6. It's 1180 14th Street. And I want to commend Brother Ustadi and the young organizers, some of whom are connected to the Garvey movement, for organizing this. So much for Trump. Hopefully we can trump him out. You hear me? Now, the topic for today's show is part 2 of last week's discussion, which was entitled Holistic and Organic Systems for Being Co-Creators with God. Co-creators with God. Now, I really want to say something. A lot of this show has covered spiritual topics. It's also covered political, economic, social, historical topics. But I want to be honest. I wasn't always on this spiritual plane. That was a process. We all have spirit within us, the Spirit of God. And as a strategist, I've never lost a battle. So you're getting some divine help. If you've got a perfect record, you can't attribute it all to your skills. But my spirit consciousness has evolved over time. So I don't want you to think that I entered the movement with this understanding. It was acquired over time. And I had to go through transformations for that to happen. So today's show is an extension of last week's show, which was dealing with holistic and organic systems for being co-creators with God. The topic for today's show is innovative systems for practicing self-love, self-mastery, and masculine-feminine synthesis. In other words, it's a further extension of the theme of empowerment, your empowerment, the empowerment of African people, and generally human empowerment around drawing on your inner powers to do what you were put here to do, to serve as conservators of this planet and of the cosmos, and doing that through exercising your special gifts as a co-creator. So I went through that last week. So this is going to deal with another dimension of that that's going to be handled from an angle that is going to surprise you. I like surprises. Strategists like surprises. And then I'm a Leo. Leo like to do surprises too, but I think a lot of people do. I've heard people say they don't like surprises until you give them one they like. They like it. But life is full of surprises. So I have some angles to come at a topic for today. So last week's show focused heavily on the central power of God, which is the power of creation. Now, God has many powers, and last week I was pointing out there are so many that they're beyond our comprehension, knowledge, or grasp. But clearly, being the creator, the ultimate creator, is of all God's powers the most central, and of all of God's qualities, most central. And so last week's show was showing you that since God's within us, that's a central power we have. Now, in past shows, I pointed out that the African in America has an ethos of creativity. So human beings have as their natural purpose to create. But when a people have an ethos, which is their unique bearing in the world, what distinguishes them in the world, then that adds another thing to the cake, some icing to the cake. And that's not because we came here specially creative, the circumstances forged it. We had to do what no other Africans in the Western Hemisphere had to do, recreate our culture. The rest of them continued a culture because they were the majority in the Caribbean and in South America, large numbers, and a majority in Brazil. So that culture could continue on. But because you had a successful, and at that point, what was becoming a successful settler colony that was genociding Native Americans, enslaving Africans, and then after that, taking half of Mexico, then the challenge to continue in African culture was greater because whites could get into your business more. This is a settler colony, whereas Jamaica or Haiti or places like that, Cuba, even though you had a large number of whites in Cuba, a majority of them was still African. So it required special creativity for us to recreate this culture. And that's why we have, as my wife had noted to me a number of years ago, among all the Africans in the world, a unique ethos. And that ethos is around creativity. That's also part of what took Trump out, our creativity. You know what I mean? So this show is going to deal with some innovative ways in which we can open up our God powers that reside inside of each of us by going into foundational systems of human empowerment. And by foundational, I'm referring to the first and the most important of the systems that we drew on, being the first people on the planet, and what we drew on to really empower us. The reason I'm going to focus on it this way is that often spirituality is treated as just an individual exercise. That is, we each draw on our spiritual powers, when in fact, we're all lights, all spirits. We have that in common. And so while we may, because we're in separate bodies, have this illusion that we're separate, really, because the infinite force of God is in all of us, in the end, our oneness is greater than our separateness. But that's the illusion that we have, living on this material plane. And it takes time and insight for us to go beyond it. Also, when we look at the problems people face, this society has been very good, and Western society has been very good in its system of individualism, to always look at the problems that people face from an individual standpoint. So if you've got homeless people, then too many people are looking at them as, well, they got mental problems, even though the majority of people who are homeless don't have mental problems. Oh, their family should have done something to prevent them from being in this position. And yeah, if they could, they should have. I mean, if there's that, then that's a part of it. But it's all blame the individual. And too many people who are in that position blame themselves, when in fact, there are systems that put them there. And so in the case of homelessness, there is the system coming from the federal government that decided not to build any more low and moderate income housing. It starts with Reagan, where he slashes the public housing budget, low, moderate income budget. And then when Clinton, he ends it. Clinton is one of the worst presidents that Black folks have had. One of the worst. He ended welfare while increasing the defense budget, which was less than 1%. He presided over the genocide in Rwanda, did nothing to intervene, and then later apologized. That boy was smart. Everything he did had a purpose. He completed the North American Free Trade Agreement of Bush 1, because Bush 1 got defeated by Clinton. Clinton came as a new Democrat who was really a Republican. You know what I mean? So you see homeless people, one, because there's not any housing left that's low and moderate that someone can afford. And two, because those that have jobs are not making enough to afford it anyway. So you got employed homeless people, while cities are constantly building housing, condos for the rich, skyscrapers, and everything else. And San Francisco has been turned into largely a homeless city, at least large parts of it, because that town has become so expensive to live in. New York and San Francisco among the most expensive, that it's hard to live there. That was my home. I left San Francisco in 1980, had to go to Richmond because the price of housing went so high. And then from Richmond to Oakland, which I like more than San Francisco, and the price of housing is going through the ceiling in Oakland, with Jerry Brown becoming mayor after he had been governor, succeeding sometime after Ronald Reagan, who had knocked his father out. Pat Brown, who I met with James Farmer around 1963 in his office. That was the best governor California's had. I could go to college on $100 a year. New York had that same thing. And we could build low and moderate income housing in the Fillmore under my leadership, and a guy named Jim Montgomery, Black engineer. I've talked about this before, 112 or so units. Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, what became housing cooperatives. because we put legislation on the books for that. I was a part of that. I was lobbying in the Senate. Only time I ever lobbied on anything in the Senate. I was then National Treasurer of National Corps. And as I pointed out, some of you haven't heard this, I got the redevelopment agency because I kicked, not just me, I led the movement. They kicked corporate behinds, baby, across the board. So when I walked in the redevelopment agency and said, give me 4 square blocks, Eddie and Ellis in the Fillmore, I was a broke full-time organizer. Technically homeless. I would live with, not live, but stay with my girlfriend or my father, or whatever, for 9 years, and I'm proud of that because those are the best years of my life. Every year has been the best year, but the golden age of the 60s, baby, that was the best. And to tap dance on the heads of your enemies, that's nice, though I never got any satisfaction out of it. So they said, how much money you got? I said, I got a lot, $1. Got 4 square blocks, baby. That's called Black Power, but you ain't got any. And so we could provide 1,400 square foot unit in the King Garvey, what then the people turned into a co-op, for $750. Actually, it was less than that. It was $140 a month starting, $140 a month. In fact, I was renting a 1,400 square foot Victorian flat for $150 a month and then $200 a month for a year, for 10 years. It was owned by 2 elderly sisters, So the point is, I'm going to approach this from a collective level today, looking at how you empower yourselves, because we too often look at this empowerment as just an individual thing, but it comes out of a collective framework. And I'm going to be looking at it from a system standpoint. Dr. Leonard Jeffries stresses the importance of systems. Well, I've innovated 6 of them, and they work. 2 of them coming from God. The one I'm going to stress today is the most important. This is the big baby. So this topic today, innovative systems for practicing self-love, self-mastery, and masculine-feminine synthesis. This is going to be a heavy focus on masculine-feminine synthesis. And that is really the key to the powers that I'm going to be talking about today. So this show will deal with some innovative ways we can open up these God powers within ourselves and dealing with a level of empowerment that is often neglected, the foundational area of empowerment. This is really neglected. And I want to point out, when we did the show on Amilcar Cabral and then Mrs. Ana Maria Cabral, one of the reasons that I think, and many scholars think, and many organizers and leaders think, Amilcar Cabral was the best leader, organizer, military strategist, and thinker, political thinker, cultural thinker, because his political thought was framed in a cultural way, of the 20th century, was because of his brilliant analysis of the social structure of Guinea-Bissau. Social structure is referring to, in this case, the family and the political or tribal structures of Guinea-Bissau. And I went through this a month or so ago, whatever. And it was the accuracy of that analysis that empowered Cabral's movement under his leadership to be successful, because it gave him the keys to how to organize the people. Brilliant. And I pointed out in that show that some of our scholars have done some brilliant work in that area as well. But this was the most brilliant. So, what I'm going to focus on this morning is the role, the foundational, seminal role that social structure plays in the formation of society and in a singular contribution that is most important. And I'm going to focus on the way in which the social structure of the world's first people and then subsequent African societies that follow that um, are at the foundation of all other powers that Africans operate or exercise and that people in general um, exercise. Thanks, Norman. Norman Brown here, the brother that woke me up, is wishing me a happy birthday. Large thanks to him. He took somebody who was asleep and woke him up. You should take that look at that. Norman's 2 years older than me. He was my vice chair in the Congress of Racial Equality. And Peggy Parks Miller, um, peace and blessings to you and others who have just come on. So, the social system is the most important system. And here I'm especially referring to family systems. Cabral was dealing with the family systems that gave rise to the political systems, and I'll be dealing with that too. In the case of Guinea-Bissau, he particularly laid stress on the Bolante people who had this just social system that is going to connect to this one, even though I'm not dealing with Cabral today. So, so I'm starting with personal empowerment, how you can empower yourself as co-creators on multidimensional levels. I'm starting with the family system because it's a family system and then the social systems that arise from it that are key in shaping the human being, all human beings. And while I'm focusing on African people, this applies to humanity at large because all truths and ultimately have a universal quality to them. Here's the key point. Very few people know and many neglect. It is a people's social system, in this case, African people's social system, that is the basis for the most important contribution, the deepest contribution that a people can make. And that is, it is their social system, in this case, the African social system, that is the basis for the formation of the deepest thought of African people, or what's called African philosophy. Huh? That's interesting because if you're going to go look at Karl Marx, for example, and I always want to stress I'm not against Marxism, any system that wants to come up with something that's going to equitably distribute wealth, even though they don't have a formula for equitably distributing power, that's good. But how in the hell could you formulate that and not start with your social system? That's where you got to start because that's where society begins. And the beginning of the social system is in the womb of the mother. That's the environment in which you come from heaven to earth. And remember, casting this in the spiritual light, of the car, you picking your destiny and all the rest of this stuff. This is also a part of a divine plan. So let's not separate the social system from the spiritual system. You picked your parents in heaven. You picked your life course in heaven, and then you complain about it when you get to earth. Donald Trump has got a victimization mentality that has put him in the position that he's in. He thinks people are out to get him. Well, they are. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Beware of what you think because it can happen, especially since he thought he could get away with everything. Uh-oh. And I know what he's thinking. Black folks are going to go after me, you know? And note that in his thing, when he was charging vote rigging and stealing the vote, he was specifically referring to those areas that had a predominant black voting body, and they voted against him. And his idea of dispossession, because he feels like the rise of the Black freedom, Black power movement, and then, of course, Obama's sitting in the White House, he was dispossessing people like him. His mentality of dispossession has put him in the point where he stands a good chance of being dispossessed. You hear me? Huh? They might fly you to the jailhouse, but after that, you ain't flying no more, buddy. You know? So the social system of a people is a basis for their philosophy. This is real key. I bet you most of you ain't heard this before. You hear me? It's the basis for their philosophy because it's the foundation of society. The family is a foundation of society. And then all other structures that arise from the family. That's the key. And what's key when we're talking about African philosophy centers on African spirit systems, or what's incorrectly called African spirituality. The reason why I say it's incorrect is there's no word in any African language for spiritual. I've said this in many shows because that's a theory. Africans are always dealing with the practice or the reality. There's a word for spirit, there's a word for praise, there's a word for prayer, words for God. You hear me? But no word for spirituality. But I use that term because people can recognize that's just a theory. But spirit is the reality. And so African philosophies are all spirit based. European are not, Aryan are not. They are material based. They are teleological. I've gone through this before. They're utility or use oriented people. It's always a question of how they can use something. Thanks, Chad, for the happy birthday thing. So they're into use. And Trump is a good example of use in the real meaning of it. Use you to death, baby, and not just black people, his own people, his own family, his own mama, who he disrespected. You know what I mean? So the focus here is on in empowering you to be co-creators. It's on the central role of the social system or family, and then all that arises from family in shaping the human being and our relationship to everything, to God, to everything. And of course, note that African philosophies are spirit-based. That's tied to the fact that they grow out of a spirit-based African family system. The founders, not just in the case of the Twa, it starts with the Twa for over 130,000 years. That's their system. They're the first to author the idea of one God without it being a killer cult, without it requiring that people had to join a religion, because their idea of one God was not religious. It was spirit-based. There was no set of dogmas. There were no set of rules. God doesn't impose those on you. When you come here, you're free to make your choices. As messed up as this planet is, it's clear. Those choices didn't come from God, for sure. Are you seeing this report now where the oceans in some cases are at 70 degrees Fahrenheit and some cases 90? Yeah. You know what that's doing to all life? You know, those were decisions made with the Industrial Revolution, burning fossil fuels, heating up the environment. Those were choices. God didn't make those choices. Humans did. In this case, whites, starting with the Industrial Revolution, and the rest of the world that's been following. And corporate America is doing everything to stop it. So African social systems, starting with the Kun, who are Twa people coming out of the Kalahari Desert. African social systems give rise to a philosophy of balance, a balance between males and females, and a synthesis between the masculine and the feminine. Because in hunter-gatherer societies, the way in which Africans approached it, survival was dependent upon cooperation, the cooperation of males and females. I noted somewhere one of our insightful viewers made the comment a couple of weeks ago that hunter-gatherer societies had problems with democracy because they couldn't resolve conflict. Lao Tzu, you made that comment. I don't know if, because Lao Tzu is a person who raises questions, so sometimes it's not his position. So I don't know if that was his position or not. But hunter-gatherer societies, based on male-female balance, had to resolve conflicts because they were very small. And if they didn't involve them, people couldn't eat. So these were, whatever the differences were, they were resolved. But it was based on how the social system was organized. And basically, hunter-gatherer societies, that's all they are, is social systems. That is, their families and extended families. Hunting bands, usually no more than 17 or 18 people in them. So the way Africans who give birth to this chose to organize their social systems was through male-female cooperation. And it arose out of a system that I'll go into in a minute of masculine-feminine synthesis. So it was the cooperation of males and females that give birth to my most important innovation, and I'm going to show you this is the key one for saving our families, our communities, and our nations globally. And it is a paradigm for all humanity, any part of which wants to embrace it. And it's the twin lineal family paradigm that came from God's vision to me through the beautiful light, where God revealed that Twa society, God didn't say Twa. God knew, because God is the best speaker, and this was telepathic communication, best speaker going. You know what I mean? God talks to you on your level when you're ready and when God thinks it's right. And if you're privileged enough for God to share this with you, and I'd spent years working on this question of what's the basis of just societies. And God's answer was, as I said before, God told me societies where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. Those are God's words, not mine. They came telepathically without words through the light. And the light is God, God, the white light, the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life. God knew that I would know who God was addressing. I instantly knew that's the Twa. I had never figured out the basis for their justness. But I knew, God knew that I'd get that. And so what's the key point about this? I want you to really think about this. Because in the definition of Ma'at, the one that's my favorite is that Ma'at, M-A-A-T, is the rudder of heaven and the beam of earth. The rudder, it's the invisible direction that heaven follows, the way a ship has a rudder that directs it. The beam of earth, it's a center point, in a house or Mother Earth, the rudder of heaven and the beam of earth, which means that this is heavenly law and earthly law. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful, And then, of course, the Kemetan orientation of speak truth, do truth, the very simple definition of what Ma'at stands on, because it's got a lot of different things we like to be philosophical about it: harmony, truth, justice, balance, right order. And Maulana Karenga added reciprocity and propriety. Reciprocity, kind of Old Testament, and propriety, that's Chinese thought, because Maulana Karenga he's a linguist. He speaks one of the Chinese languages. So, but that was not in the formulation of Ma'at. When Obenga was staying with me, I raised that question with Obenga. He stayed with me for 4 months, 1998. I said, Obenga, is that a part of the definition of Ma'at? He said, no, you know. So those are all, beautiful statements about Ma'at. But I'm going to say this, that this formulation of how Twa societies operated, where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society, that is the most practical definition of Ma'at that you can come up with on earth. That is the key to just societies. But because you've been jaded so much, not all of you, but too many of you, you don't really think that, that can't be applied. How can everybody run everything? You're not even convinced, some of you, that was the formula. I know with the hunter-gatherer, I think I made my point with people that have watched that. And then we had a series on the classless age grade society showing how when African women who were gatherers innovated agriculture, the agrarian systems, such as Igbo and others, practice this male-female equal empowerment. And then it started to incline a little bit more to male or female, usually more to the male due to sexual struggles and stuff. The first imbalances didn't come with the presence of the European. If you read my book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, I go into this in great detail. I've really not discussed in detail what this system is based on yet, but I'm giving you some high points here because I think they're relevant. So the African basis of just societies that prevailed for over 130,000 years in hunter-gatherer societies was male-female equal empowerment. That was the secret to Twa just societies. I think that's the best formula for practicing Ma'at on earth. It's got to be adapted to a new reality, large societies, which it was in Africa, So this is the most practical, best definition of Ma'at on earth, because when you spread power equally between males and females throughout society, in the case of hunter-gatherer, it would be 18 or 19 people, but we're talking about societies because this was adapted to larger societies later on, then it's going to be the just interests of the people that will prevail, because the overwhelming majority of the people are going to have it in their interest to see that they prosper. That's going to be the basis for why this works. And that's why Africa could erect communal societies where no person could own most of the land, air, and water. In fact, nobody could own anything. You could use it because God didn't put this here with some contract that you need to put a down payment on a tree. A tree has a life force of God in it. They don't recognize that they're owned. Air and water, essentials for life. God who's just, you think God erected that? No, that's private property, And there were various forms of it up to this vicious system called capitalism. So when you spread power out among all the males and females equally, then the just interests of the people will prevail. Your founding fathers knew that. That's why, they created a constitution that would protect the few against the many. And that's why Madison said that if they allowed the people to run things, they would equitably distribute the wealth. They knew that. You're talking about white people. They weren't talking about equitably distributing it with us, but among them. They knew that, That's why Shays' Rebellion triggered the Constitutional Convention, because these ex-veterans of the War of Independence were being dispossessed. And they were challenging this dispossession. And people like George Washington, who was the wealthiest person in the country, owned a big plantation, was dispossessing Native Americans, led a number of wars against Native Americans, at least was a part of it, was so disturbed and willing to chair this so that they could keep the 1% with 50%. So this is the key right here, this formula. And I'm going to say this, the Marxist formula of ownership and control of the means of production. I agree with that, in this case, Marx was talking about the ownership and control of the means of production by the working class. And I think at some point he saw the working class as being a large group in the society and called it the dictatorship of the proletariat. For one, he didn't study the social systems that these societies were erected on. And these, were based on male rule, patriarchy, and the unjustness of that. And he was dealing with economic empowerment, but what about the political empowerment? And that's one of the reasons that these so-called Western, and in the case of China, the Chinese Revolution, failed in terms of the revolutionary mandate, was because in the end, it ended up being one person often running things in Russia or in China, because they were operating off of an emperor principle. And so when you have this kind of system, even though it may do some things better, the Chinese are doing some things better than this country in certain ways in their development and stuff. They've taken as many as 800 million people out of poverty, It's a handful of old men that make the decisions there. And if they ain't right, you're in trouble because they got the power, So social systems, in this case, African social systems, are the foundation of African philosophy. And the formulation of African philosophy as Ma'at, which was a Kemetic formulation, though it comes from the Twa Masuri, Maasouri, which is the origin of Ma'at, meaning straight, upright, and just. And a lot of African societies may not have called it Ma'at, but that was their idea also of balance, living in balance. This was their idea, living in truth, living in justice. This was a prevailing idea. And most Black mothers, when they raise children, that's their prevailing idea, and a lot of other mothers as well. So the twin lineal family model of equal male-female empowerment that prevailed for over 130,000 years has been time-tested. This is the best expression of Ma'at on earth, the best. And if you look at the societies in which the people lived the best, outside of the hunter-gatherer, which was the one where people did the least amount of work, had the most amount of leisure, there was no war, no slavery, oppression of women or children. That's the most just. But then when you look at these smaller, classless age grade societies, I studied some of them on this show, you read them, Chancellor Williams looked at them in Destruction of Black Civilization. That's where Blacks lived the most prosperous lives, This is also true of Native Americans, by the way. We weren't the only ones that had this because it came from us, and this system prevailed throughout the world. Twa civilization is the largest, most long-lasting, and most just, because it was based on this formula, you know. So this is the key to equitable distribution of wealth, equitable distribution of power. That's the key. You hear me? And that's the problem today. You ain't got the power, but you have the power to get the power. It's going to be rough and tough. It always has been. The greater the challenge, the greater the achievement, you know? And you're on the winning side now. What's been up is going down. Things are coming around. As Malcolm said, what makes them sad makes me glad. You know what I mean? My wife said, yeah, but you're in this place. But I'm not of it, baby. Not of it. You hear me? So this is also why hunter-gatherer agrarian democracies that follow the communal order. Land, air, and water share, So balanced societies based on balanced family systems create balanced human beings. And I suppose because it's the cart of the horse which comes first, these first 12 came in here balanced. They're the closest to God. They're the first ancestors for humanity. They are, as they call themselves, the pure people. Someone asked last week about what are the systems for empowering you to get there, and one that I didn't discuss, Lao Tzu asked that question. Polishing your mirror. That is trying to clean out the impurities in our character. That's key. And these first people, as they called themselves, were pure people. That was their term. They were not egotistical. And that was really key to their ability to create balanced societies. The balanced societies were key, of course, to creating balanced individuals. And balanced individuals, to be really balanced, it's an inner masculine feminine synthesis that is really key to people rising to the higher level. Because when you've got the synthesis of the masculine and the feminine, then you're able to rise to the higher intuitional plane. And they operated on that plane. If you read my book, The Integration Trap, I give you modern day evidence of the higher mind qualities of the Twa, being able to see ahead and being able to see behind. So this is real key. Now, I'm starting with social systems first and describing holistic and organic systems that empower human beings to be co-creators with God, because a key component of this, and I know this in my own experience in terms of moving from a more political orientation without as much orientation towards the spirit, there was a lot of internal synthesis work that I had to do, in terms of synthesizing the feminine with the masculine. But there's a process for this, and this is universal. It's basic to African cultures, basic to Native American, basic to Asian cultures. It's what I call a cosmic system. It's a cosmic logic that prevails on Earth. That is, not in the systems that have been erected in the West or now in the East that can be oppressive and that are oppressive. But it is the natural system of Earth, when you're in harmony with it, that prevails. And this is twin logic, not the Aryan linear logic of dichotomy, which means separating things. So in the Western or Aryan sense, and I pointed this out before, good is separate from bad. Spirit is separate from matter. Life is separate from death. Um, Order is separate from disorder. So this is dichotomous logic, and it's designed to create a hierarchy so that those on the top can control everything. In universities, they call this critical thinking, which I refuse to teach, because people are born with the capacity to think. Sometimes you just need the right information. But they were using linear logic, major premise, minor premise, conclusion. The rest of the world doesn't think like this. And this isn't the way nature thinks or the spirit thinks, because we come to this earth with free will. In order for us to learn, we have to experience the totality of life. And that means if you're going to understand life, you've got to understand death. Native Americans, they have a saying, death sits on your shoulder. It's a friend. Make friends with it. And so the Kemites said, life is slow dying. That's cosmic logic. You don't separate life from death. You're dying every day. And death is not what you think it is. It's being reborn to a new life, So similarly, when the homeless are being blamed for everything, the poor are being treated as criminals because they've been deprived of the power by others who grabbed all of it, then, their circumstance is caused by disorder. And so if you're going to bring about a change of homelessness, a change of poverty, there's got to be a new order. And it won't go all at once. It'll be piecemeal. And for those who are revolutionaries who reject reform, they forgot how they became revolutionaries. And if the only thing you're prepared for is the ultimate thing, you'll be waiting a long time. You got to deal with the here and now and take advantage of any circumstance that could improve the lives of our people and the lives of humanity, And so reform is the embryo or the mother of revolution. Not all reforms is going to lead to revolution. Reform where, you get a Band-Aid on a problem. You get some legislation on low-income housing, but not enough probably, and moderate income housing. Or you get a wage that's higher, The fact that you got to put all this time into working and at pointless jobs in many cases that aren't rewarding, that don't reflect your own spirit, your own gifts, that in and of itself is oppressive. But the point is, the path for learning on Mother Earth, that's why spirits come from heaven to earth, is the twin path. You can't understand life without understanding death. You can't understand the positive without understanding the negative. You can't understand the masculine without understanding the feminine. And I want to say that this was a transformation for me, the transformation of a mindset trained in Western Academy, where it was a good or bad thing. So I had to recondition my mindset, my philosophy, to get to this. And that's a part of what this social system, being the basis for African philosophy or any philosophy, is all about. So the world's first social system coming out of hunter-gatherer societies give birth to the world's first philosophical systems that are spirit-based and that are masculine and feminine. So you have the feminine goddess nurturing wise principle that's in all of us, but is especially expressive of the female. And you have the masculine fatherly principle, the seed principle of creativity and protection. And both of those principles reside in every human being. For the masculine inclines more, the feminine prevails more, but it's a synthesis of the two. It's never balanced, because if it's balanced, then we'll have sexual androgyny. We will not be clear about what our sexuality is and our purpose is, from the masculine and feminine standpoint in life. But always the rule is that in the case of the masculine, the true expression of humanity on the part of the male is by accentuating the feminine. And similarly with females. Females don't have as much problem in African culture and African American culture because of the strength that African women have that males have, And those were the issues I had to deal with, Strong on the masculine, weak on the feminine. Feminine's not weak, Feminine is strong. Water is illustrative of the feminine principle. Water's everybody's friend except when it floods. It's too much of it. And water is the key composition of Earth, 75% or so of water. We're made up of the same percentage of water, more or less, as Mother Earth is, And it's symbolic of the intuitional, the higher mind, It's no accident when people are being trained in higher mind sciences in Africa, it's often with a bowl of water, being able to see things with a bowl of water. Or when you're going to sleep, putting a clean bowl of water next to your bed that enables you to bring out dreams. I know some people here are rich in that higher mind quality. So in order for males and females to be equally empowered to govern every phase of society, there's got to be this synthesis of masculine and feminine. And I don't think that the world's first people had too much trouble with that. It's us coming out of these patriarchal influenced societies that have to deal with that. So to practice twin lineal family or social organization, then there's a transformation, and I use here Malcolm's formula of philosophy, attitude patterns, thought patterns, communication patterns, and behavior patterns. That was Malcolm's way of describing that. And so there's an internalization that you got to do to work on it, to get a greater harmony. It won't be a balance of the two, but a synthesis. But that's the key to really having balance in society. If you're going to have truly just societies, as Cabral had made the point, that's a moral issue, ultimately. And so the question is, what's the commitment to truth and justice? And when you spread it out to all the people, those that don't have the commitment are going to be outweighed by those who do. I'm getting practical here, And in all the movements I've led, consensus has played a big part in that, Best ideas come in that way. So I'm speaking practically as well as theoretically. So another key point about these social systems being the basis for philosophy and African social systems being the basis for African philosophies is that, particularly in their foundation, but in general this is true, but especially in their foundation, the world's first African systems of society, the social systems, the twin lineal systems, they were total systems. That is, they gave birth to systems of organization that were total. So the formula, all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. That's total organization. So from the cooperation of males and females in the family comes the cooperation of males and females in the hunting band, comes the cooperation of males and females in decision making, comes the opening of males and females to the higher forces of spirit and of God. So these are total systems, not partial systems. So these systems, if anybody thinks, oh, all you have to do is get a group and have the males and females being equal in empowerment in the group, it'll be just. No, there's got to be some justice to that. Numbers alone don't make it just. Suppose you're in a society like we are in America, where it was a majority of white males and females equally empowered to govern every phase of society. Was that going to be just? That's why in the book I added just to it, that God didn't say that. Here, you're going to apply it. It's got to be all the just males and females, not just any males and females. Or in Rwanda, you have a situation where over 60% of their parliament is made up of women. Does that guarantee that the society will be just? No. And in fact, the president of Rwanda has the real power. He led the military, you know, and so it depends on what he thinks, because they got the final power, which is gunpowder, you know. So, but this is key. But to be total, this has to be the prevailing system of the society at large. You hear me? The society at large. And you say, how do you do that? Oh, it's a lot easier than you think. Decentralization is the key to all of this. I'm not going into this today. So social systems provide the foundation for a people's philosophy, and the world's first social systems gave birth to a system of organization that was total, governing every phase of society, male, female empowerment. And it was a spirit-based philosophy that embraced every phase of life, because when males and females, and this is the real key thing, in these hunter-gatherer societies that were balanced, you're living in harmony, not only with males and females, but with nature, with the cosmos, and therefore with God. And living in these kind of balanced societies, you are opened up to the true nature of God. Kurt Thomas said, "This sounds deeper than holistic. I need to learn a more expressive language." Yeah, it's a totality. And in fact, the Bambara, when they talk about knowledge, and in this case, knowledge being practiced by those who are at the high level of the light, they talk about a totality of knowledge, a totality. Or what I last week talked about and have talked about before in the Adunaso system of the Dogon, where any part of it is a whole. That's the way God has created nature. Last week I was talking about how we're miniature stars. We're made up of the same stuff as the stars. We're stardust, you know, because in anything is everything. That's God's formula for how God created this. And we'll never get to where God is at, because God is the totality of everything. Positive, by the way. So when you're living in this balance, as the Twa were, who along with the Bambara have one of the best definitions of God, infinite force for the Bambara outside of space and time, and then for the Twa, who give birth to that, a part of this infinite force is in everything God creates. The Bambara would agree with that. The Twa could understand that, because being the world's first people and coming from heaven as pure spirits and maintaining that through the social organization they created, they were in closest contact to the vibratory forces of God. And that's what God is. And that's why music is so important in general, because it's one of the purest expressions of God force, especially when it's a good expression and not just noise. But even then, for some people, noise is music. So I get it. Rock. Some of that rock. Some people get something out of that. So I can't. Or classical music is more of an intellectual music, but people get something out of that. And there is a certain vibratory force in all of it. So people who are living in these balanced societies can become co-creators much more easily because they're in constant contact with God's vibratory forces. And because they're pure spirits, their intention is good. They're using this for the betterment of humanity. These societies were not concerned about the material things per se. They had enough to live on and be happy. So this is what endows the mother civilizations of the planet based on just social systems to be so creative, to be able to invent medicine, astrophysics, physics, and then the rest of social systems, which again we tend to disregard. So the world's first philosophy was not only a spirit-based philosophy, and the world's first civilization was not only spirit-based, it was also political, even though the term politics comes from the Greeks. I'm using a term of governance, the way in which people govern themselves. So that, therefore, as I pointed out before, the Twa give birth to the world's first democracies, not the Greeks. That's a very short interval in which Athens and a few other Greek city-states practiced the vote, restricted to a handful of men who could only elect the rich to office. Women were excluded, strangers were excluded, and of course, slaves were excluded, pretty much the system you had in the United States. So it's this system that gives birth to male-female equal empowerment, gives birth to true democracy that is consensus-based. And it not only gives birth to this system of democracy, which is another means of empowering you to be co-creators, but it gives rise to a natural economic system where every human being is entitled to the tree of life. That's a parable coming out of the spiritual blues. I got the right to the tree of life. You hear me? It was based on that. And that also creates a dignified set of human beings without women having to prostitute themselves, without children being abused, not just in hunter-gatherer societies, but the societies that follow, and where everything material is viewed as spirit-based and therefore sacred, and therefore treated with that respect. And this is why Africans in these societies could manage the environment so well, while the environment now is being abused. So just as African social systems give birth to the world's first philosophies and just societies, Arab social systems, developing out of desert conditions, gave rise to social systems that Arab historians describe as, quote, group feeling. What does group feeling mean? Because in the desert environment, that is a rough environment. You know, I was at John Henry Clark's house in 1995 and delivered a copy of the Mother Principle to him that he had written an introduction to, along with one of our noted scholars, another noted scholar, Asa Hilliard. He was blind as a bat and went to a section of his library, 25,000 books, and pulled one out. Told me to go upstairs and check this out. And it was on the Arab. And it was basically saying that the Arab living in this nomadic condition, they didn't talk about group feeling. They said basically they didn't trade. They took what you had. That was the essence of what this book that he had me read part of was about. And so the Arab coming out of a desert condition, living under a tent where you've got a family living under a tent, that could be an extended family. Their idea of power was, and the right to rule was, the ones who come from the strongest tent have the right to rule. It sounds a lot like will to power, but it's different. It's different. So we always like to equate everything with white people. Study people's systems and look what they say about them themselves. Group feeling, baby. And so when Africans, particularly Africans who didn't Africanize Islam, took that on because the Prophet Muhammad was trying to civilize these Arabs and get them to be more respectful and more godlike and stuff like that. But they still had this inclination towards power. And so when some Africans took this on and didn't make Islam work through the African lens, which they did in many parts of West Africa, then you saw instability in rule because that's what it ended up creating. And so when the Moors take over Spain, these are the blacks under Tariq bin Ziyad. After a week of battle, they take over Spain. And then their leaders, their Arab leaders that never thought that they would win that battle, give them the worst part of the geography of Spain. And it took the highest courts in Islam to adjudicate that and come up with a just decision. And so blacks shared in the rulership. There was a period of time where they were the major rulers and then times where Arabs would come in. But always you had this problem of a new group of people with group feeling coming in to try and displace the people in power. That's the nature of their systems. But it shows you that social systems are the basis for a people's philosophy. You hear me? If you're looking at Saudi Arabia right now, the Saud family, they're sitting on top of all of this stuff, And as long as they can maintain the power, that's what they're going to continue to do, huh? And then if you look, so this is the key point. So your philosophy is shaped by that. That's what is determining that. And so in the case of the Aryan, the Lord and Master syndrome, and I'm finishing a book on this, mainly on Seba, but I deal with the history of this Lord and Master syndrome that I pointed out before, begins around 4,000 to 5,000 BC in Ukraine, in Russia, and the Caucasus Mountains. Notice Ukraine. And it's under circumstances in which the social system undergoes a change from pastoral life, where the Aryans are following their cattle. They have wagons and whatnot, and they're going to follow their cattle for pasture land. That's pastoral life. They begin to tame the horse. And as they really tame the horse, then a new culture evolves, and that culture is one of nomadism, patriarchy, war, and violence, where the central value is power. The social system, as it undergoes change in this particular case, is the basis for that. And what's the philosophy? Naked power. Morals ain't got no play in it. I went through this in some previous shows. So pillage becomes the basis for that. And that's the order that we're faced with today. And that order is now called capitalism. The most pillaging system ever conceived on the planet. Now, what I really want to stress here is that not only is a people's social system the foundation for the deepest aspect of their culture, their philosophy, African social system is also the foundation for the world's social system. And because of this, the just nature of the twin lineal family system has been proven to be the most enduring feature of African culture and African civilization, not generally understood. Not generally understood. This has been the hidden secret in African history. Its reason for its justice, its reason for its power, its reason, its reason for being such an enduring model. Because when a model is just, it can last. Now we know in an age of violence, of power grabs, where a few control everything, to bring this about is a whole nother story. Remember, I said I'm an OR, original revolutionary. I'm offering you alternative systems. And this is the most important of all. This twin lineal model of male female equal empowerment that comes from God, God revealed to me what the base of these societies were, but it came from African people who erected them. This is the formula for revitalizing your families, your communities, and the nations of Africa today. Someone was talking about Niger, and Chad have problems. Of course they do. They're under colonialism. We're going to be going into that. We're going to start getting into some African current stuff. But that's all a result of the disruption of these balanced systems. And so the gun has taken the place of male female balance. And so a few people with guns decide, well, we don't like how things going. They might phrase it as we're going to come in and restore constitutional power, or the Sudan, where people actually threw out a dictator. And then America started dealing, and the West started dealing not with the people that threw out the dictator, but started dealing with elements of the dictatorship that have now taken the form of two rival generals fighting and messing the country up and killing a lot of people. And that's this Western colonial model. There's a lot to it. I've gone to some of it before, that is too often running things in Africa, and with the people being trained by the United States. So these are systems that are going to have to be replaced, but you're going to have to know what is it you put in their place. That's what I'm dealing with here. You know, on a minuscule level, in your communities, in your families right now. To have truly functional families, and a lot of Black families are functional, and many are dysfunctional. Um, that is dependent upon the balance you're able to restore between males and females. Coco is noted 11:42. Well, this is pretty good for me, an hour and 42 minutes. I've been trying to get it down to an hour, but I knew I couldn't do it today. So the topic for today was innovative systems for practicing self-love, self-mastery, and masculine and feminine synthesis. Today's presentation was designed to suggest that this masculine feminine synthesis and male female balance is something that we have the power to practice internally and to restore socially, politically, economically, and otherwise on various levels, micro and at long term, macro, small and large. But it is really a question of us taking the best of the features of our societies to restore justice on the planet. Hotep, I hope you got something out of this. Wolf Manlu, the European is at war with nature due to his origin in the Wormian Ice Age. More complex than that, brother. I'm going to tell you. That's something you won't hear me going into for a while. Let's see. Okay, I'm trying to find some comments here. Higher Heka, Arab systems sound like Aryan. Um, no, Aryan is based on arbitrary power, period. Group feeling is tied to family. So, yeah, it's similar in that there's the idea the strong will rule, but there's a family connection to that. And then there's a geographical basis for that. And it's similar, but not the same. Similar, not the same. Don't, don't try and put someone else's system under someone else's. Look at their system. And so group feeling, that's what it is, you know. And so that means that among a group of Arabs, the family with the strongest bonds that can pull together the strongest combination ends up ruling. And so that's a little different from what comes out of Greece and other places. Similar, but not the same. I hope you get the point. What's different about today's show is I'm locating this within social system. That's no small thing because what it means is that it's your family system that is really the key to a lot of other things. And I'm not going into today the disruption of African American or African Caribbean family systems, except to say that um, this twin lineal system prevails a lot more than you think under some very difficult circumstances. So it's not as pure and perfect. But wherever you have what you call functional African or African American families, you have this model. That's a whole nother discussion. Malika Wa Mungu, she's asking, make sure, Malika, you subscribe. Encourage your friends to. What's my definition of God? Um, there's a bunch of shows on this, and you should watch them on spirit power, on the Twa, on different things. But the basic definition I repeated in today's show, people who have gone to the other side say the same thing and come back. The life after death experiences, they say the same thing. When they're asked, how do you define God? And of course, that isn't how someone that's been to heaven would put it. They wouldn't say how you define it. They would say, what is God? They invariably say infinite force. God's not a person. And this infinite force, as the Bombara say, outside of space and outside of time, because heaven is outside of the realm of time and space. that that is God. And that's the light that's within all of us. So that is God. And it's a force that's absolutely good, unconditional in its love. I've seen this force. And when you see the force, it envelops you because it's a part of you. But the twin lineal model I was given, it comes from that light. I've seen it. Most beautiful experience of my life. That's why when people usually pass away for a few minutes and then come back to earth, usually when they're in the heavenly realm, they don't want to come back. They usually come back because they're reminded of uncompleted tasks that they have on earth. We're all here for purposes. Thanks, Coco. I appreciate you too. And I believe you got me on the Black Power TV. Wasn't that you that got me on there? Thanks. And I appreciate your comments that I get on Facebook. Lao Tzu will be in Illinois is working on sustainable community development. Very good, Lau. That's needed. Lao Tzu. Can you expand on the quality of just males and females and how we structure our lives to produce these individuals? Yeah, that's a lot. But as the ancients said, as we realize now, what's most important about the just male and female is the human being, the person's adherence to the truth. As the Kemites would say, speaking it and doing it, not just talking about it, living it. So I think that is one key component of just males and females. The older blacks, whether in the Caribbean or here in this country, in Africa, a lot of times they would reach agreements on things like the transfer of property. And it wouldn't be based on a contract, it would be based on their word because they were their word. Some of us have departed from that now, you know. So a example of a just male or female is someone who, when they say something, that's what they do. There's no daylight between words and actions. It's based on the truth. Now, of course, we can get into the definition of what is the truth, and there are layers of the truth and so forth and so on. And we're living in a society that is crooked, as Malcolm said, as a pretzel. So truth is not what this society is based on. And so there will be those that will say, what is the truth? There is no such thing as truth. Truth is relative, and so forth and so on. But I'd say that one part of that is the truth. And then it's creating structures that enable that to happen. We see so many things going wrong in these societies because of the way in which the structure of the society is unjust and unbalanced. So it creates imbalances within people. And so, to the extent that you're coming out of social systems, family systems that emphasize that, then you're in a better position. But when you don't, then you have the reason to correct it by drawing on your best models. M. Jewell, but Black women are a larger target now to turn against Black men today, especially via education. There's disparities of conditions now between males and females where the males are getting put into a weaker economic position. The females are not in a strong position either, but stronger. Education is one of those. And that's only since the attacks on Black communities since the late 60s, where a good part of that has been laid on the backs of Black men, making them the heaviest proportion among Blacks in the criminal justice system, for example. So, and then with the economic system being weighed against good paying jobs and stuff, then it's hard to sustain families. And so there are some, including some sisters, who have to deal with life on their own. And then the question is, do you accept that as a normal condition, or are there things we can do to change it? Yeah, M. Jewell, most people have said that, in fact, John Henry Clark said the mother principle is best read in a group. And so That might be something some of you might think of doing. Wolf Manlu, the 13 colonies were slums. They emptied the jails to send them here. Yeah, true. Of course, not the slums for everybody. They had the palaces for the rich, you know. Wolf Manlu, they know they're dying out. He's talking about the decline of the West, equating this to some of the invaders of Kemet. Lao Tzu question. If the European, aka Western Asian, is teleological, then what will become of us when they have no need of us? Well, in fact, we're in that position right now. A sizable sector, and particularly with this artificial intelligence, with the various ways in which technology is displacing people, um, yeah, there's a sizable section of blacks who are looked upon, and not just blacks, but others as well, as disposable. So that's something we have to look at and be aware of. And we have to build economic power as well as political power and social power to combat that. Yeah, Wolf Manley was saying ocean temperatures are higher than air temperatures in areas of the planet. Yeah, ain't that something? Thanks for the birthday wishes. Stephen McKenzie refers to one of the things that Bill Clinton did with his crime bill in 1994, put 9.7 billion into the prison system. He was never for blacks. Yeah, that's true. In fact, made carjacking a death penalty offense. Clinton did. You imagine? Thank you for blessing me with a long life. That's a blessing I look forward to. Yeah, there are two volumes to the Art of Leadership, Volume 1 and Volume 2. There's no Art of Leadership, Volume 3. Um, Lao Tzu, yeah, he's asking Robin if she has Volume 2. Yes. Question: Are you aware of the conservative think tank Project 2025 and their position papers to increase the powers of the next conservative president? Yeah, the Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation picked most of Trump's cabinet. And it's basically a project that is carrying out Trump's desire to centralize all departments directly under him so that he can do his number. You know, it's called pure dictatorship, pure fascism. Ed Donaldson, what is your perspective of the Constitution in relationship to the matter? Could it be driving the behavior? Well, you know, basically, you know, the Constitution in this particular case, referring to the 4 charges against Trump in this case, provides for that when a person is elected president, even though it's not direct, it's through the Electoral College, that, you know, the person who was dejected leaves and the person that was elected comes into office. And so it's a violation of that constitutional principle, you know. It's also a violation of the stability of so-called constitutional power, because technically, when Nixon ran against Kennedy the first time Kennedy won, technically he won by some stolen votes. He got 200,000 black votes, but then the mafia delivered to him some votes that didn't exist. He could have challenged it. He didn't because he did not want to undermine the order of the system. Nixon, of all people. So that's what Trump was challenging. See if there's anything new on the bottom. How do we internally practice to master the twin lineage system? The males and the female and in the families should be practicing overtime. Read the book Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, and it'll give you an in-depth introduction to this. That book is probably 500 some odd pages, but it's actually over 700 pages. I reduced the type size of the book. It's over 700 pages. You need to read those and you get a better understanding. We'll go into that in detail another time. Oh, Tabo Melissa. Hey, greetings from South Africa, Southern Kemet. Right on. Glad to have you. It was good to have Brother Nkulu on, and we'll have him on many more times, and to see a growing number of brothers and sisters from South Africa. Welcome. You know. Okay, that looks like that's it. Hotep, until next week, uh, we'll have the interview with Davy D, and the topic is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And then again, I want to remind people, for people who live in the San Francisco Bay Area or in Oakland, on August the 19th, there'll be a program at Lowell Park, 1180 14th Street in Oakland, commemorating Marcus Garvey. I'll be a keynote speaker, but they have a lot of other things and people on the program. So, Hotep.